by two men who were also covered with wounds. Their eyes shone bright and resolute in their feverish faces. One of them, having no scabbard, was still holding his sword, which was twisted and stained with blood. We pulled up instinctively and saluted. "I haven't been able to reach the Marne," said F., with disappointment in his voice. "But being fired upon by their outposts in the dark, we charged and got through, and then charged through two villages under a hail of bullets, and again we had to charge their outposts to get back. You see, I have brought back 2 men out of 8, and all my horses have been killed. These horses," pointing to his own, "are those of 3 Uhlans we killed so as not to have to come home on foot." Certainly they were not riding the pretty little animals that make such excellent mounts for our Chasseurs d'Afrique, but were perched upon 3 big mares with their heavy German equipment. "But," F. repeated in a tone of vexation, "I wasn't able to get to the Marne. There were too many of them for us." We pressed his unwounded hand firmly. Poor F., brave fellow! Not many days afterwards he was to meet a glorious death charging once more with 3 Chasseurs to rescue one of his men who had been wounded. A more perfect type of cavalryman, I might say of knight, was never seen. He sleeps now, riddled with lance wounds, in the plains of Champagne. We had hardly left him when we caught sight of the reconnoitring party of my comrade O., and were overjoyed to find that he had come back unscathed with all his men. And yet he had had to face a fair number of dangers, attacks by cyclists and pursuit by cavalry. At Crézancy, where he had arrived at 3 o'clock in the morning, he found the village occupied and strongly held. There is only one bridge over the railway there, and that is at the other end of the village. By good luck he was able to get hold of one of the inhabitants, and he forced him, by holding a revolver to his head, to guide him by all sorts of byways so as to make a circuit without attracting attention and get to the bridge. There he set forward at a gallop and passed in spite of being fired on by the guard. At last he reached the Marne. The only bridge he found intact for crossing the river was at the bridge at Jalgon, a slender, fragile suspension bridge, but one we should be very glad to find if there was still time to use it. He then hurried back through the woods, but not without having to run the gauntlet of rifle fire several times more. He brought back information which was to guide our advance. It was seen at once there was not a minute to lose. The Captain detached me immediately with my troop to act as a flank guard along the line of the wooded crest by which the road on the right was commanded, whilst F., with his troop, crossed the Surmelin and the railway which runs alongside of it, and went to carry out the same task on the other side of the valley. My job was difficult enough. In fact, the heights which look down upon the course of the Surmelin to the east consist of a series of ridges separated by narrow ravines at right angles to the river, and these we had to cross to continue our route towards the north. The enemy seemed to have withdrawn completely from this region, and the cannon fire in the distance towards the east could hardly be heard. At last, at about 7 o'clock in the morning, we debouched upon the valley of the Marne. Whilst I sent some troopers along the road which winds the Surmelin to keep touch with my Captain, I carefully inspected the right bank of the Marne with my glasses. The scene would have tempted a painter, and the labours of war do not prevent one from enjoying the charm of such delightful pictures. The sun was gradually dispersing the mists of the sullen morning, and was beginning to gild the wooded heights which looked down upon the 2 banks of the river. Everywhere a calm was reigning, which seemed to promise a day of exquisite beauty. We might have fancied that we were bent on some peaceful rural work favoured by a radiant autumn morning. The Marne in this region winds in graceful curves. It flows limpid and clear through a narrow valley carpeted with green meadows and bordered, right and left, by gentle hills dotted with woods. At our feet, peeping from the poplars and beeches on the bank, we saw the white houses of dainty villages, Chartives, Jalgon, Varennes and Barzy. I directed my attention more particularly towards Jalgon, because it was in that direction that the attempt to cross the river would be made. The heights immediately above Jalgon rise steeply on the north bank and almost stand in the river. On the other hand, to the south, on our side, the left bank of the Marne is bordered by extensive meadows crossed by the railway and the high road to Épinay. The position, therefore, would have been very strong for the Germans if they had crossed to the other side of the river for we should have been obliged, before we could reach the bridge, to traverse a vast open expanse which they could have kept under the fire of their artillery. My Chasseurs, prompt to grasp the reason of things, scrutinised the opposite bank no less intently than I. No movement could be seen. Nothing suggested the presence of troops among the russet thickets which covered the sides of the silent hill. Could they have already repaired further north? Could they have abandoned this formidable position without any attempt to defend it? At that moment one of my Chasseurs appeared, coming by the steep path which led from the road to the wooded ridge on which we were. His horse was panting, for the declivity was stiff, and he had had to hasten. He brought me orders. "Mon Lieutenant, the Captain has sent me to tell you to join him as quickly as possible at the other end of the bridge. The first troop has already crossed, but some of the enemy's horse have been seen on the other side of the village." As he said these words we heard some firing in the distance, which sounded very distinct and sharp in the radiant peace of that beautiful September morning. "Come, so much the better," thought I. "We have engaged them. We shall have a good time." My men had already begun to joke and to be more alert and abrupt in their movements. It was a kind of joyous reaction which always affects troopers when they begin to hear the guns and look forward to a good hard ride in which they, like the rest of us, are always certain of getting the best of it. In single file we went quickly down towards the plain by the stony, slippery path. We soon reached the high road, and then turned to the left and came upon the long causeway bordered by poplars which led to the bridge. Quite close to the bank I saw a small group of dismounted cavalrymen, and soon recognised our Colonel with his brigade staff. He was giving his orders to the Lieutenant Colonel commanding the Chasseurs d'Afrique. I went up to him to report, and learnt that the first squadron had already crossed the river and occupied the village on the other side. Some parties of German cavalry had been seen on the neighbouring heights. I got ready to rejoin my comrades at once, but patience was required if the Marne was to be crossed. The bridge appeared to be a delicate sort of toy hovering over the water. How could they dream of sending thousands of men, horses and guns over a thing so slender that it looked as though it were supported by fragile meshes of spider's web? Captain D. gave me the Colonel's precise orders: not to pass more than 4 troopers at a time, and these at walking pace. Taking the initiative in the movement, I started with my first 4 Chasseurs. The bridge rang strangely under our hoofs, and seemed to me to oscillate in an alarming manner. Fortunately, the enemy was not on the other side. If he had been, our passage would have cost us dear. As I was making these reflections, a violent fusillade burst out from the edge of the woods overlooking Jaulgonne to the east. It must have been directed upon the village, for no bullets whistled around us, so it was probably our first squadron engaging the German cavalry. When I got to the other end of the bridge my impatience increased. It was torture to think of the time it would take to collect my 30 men and hurry forward to help the others, and I noticed the same impatience in my men's looks. Those who were on the bridge, walking slowly and gently across, seemed to implore me to let them trot, but I pretended not to understand, and the horses' feet continued to trample heavily over the echoing bridge. At last all my men were over. We fell in and reached Jaulgonne at a trot. On passing through it we found several of the inhabitants on their doorsteps. "Monsieur l'officier! Monsieur l'officier! Will they come back again?" "Never!" I shouted with conviction. I stopped an orderly, who told me that the German cavalry were firing on the exit from the town. How many of them he could not say, as they were hidden in the woods. He told me, too, that the first squadron was holding all the entrances to the north and east of the village, except the one on the river bank on the road to Marcilly, where my comrade F. had posted his troop. I decided then to put myself at the disposal of the party defending the chief exit from the village, the one that opened on the road to Fismes. It was the most important one, for it was in that direction that the Germans were retiring. The village had been prevented from spreading further to the north by the heights, which formed an abrupt barrier. It is built astride the road to Fismes, which thus becomes its principal, if not its only, street. I had then to go right through Jaulgonne before I could get out of it in the direction of the firing. I soon did this, and found the horses of the first squadron massed in the short alleys leading out of the main street. I ordered my troop to dismount in a yard much too small and very inconvenient. But the first thing to do was to clear the causeway and shelter our horses from the bullets, which might enfilade the street if the fighting bore away towards the left.